Hi, everyone. This is Victoria. I'm the head of global operations for the Lonely Entrepreneur. Welcome to our weekly fireside chat. Michael, great to see you here.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Hope everyone is doing well. We know it's been a rough week with everything that's going on. I'm hoping people are able to find, ways to have meaningful discussions and learn and explore, all the things that we have going on right now. And here's to hoping for a better future all around. I'm going to give it a couple of minutes for everybody to jump on. Fridays can be a little slow sometimes. We're now entering into the summer months where I think a lot of people go on kind of, vacation mode. Let's see. Michael, so as we wait for people to jump on, one of the things that I think people really look forward to is just hearing some of your, firsthand stories of surviving the financial crisis in 2008 and, leading a company of 500 people through it and figuring out what to do and not do. Since this week's topic is all about, negotiating in a time of crisis, can you take us back for a couple of minutes and talk to us about, how, first of all, how did you, negotiating is a skill. How did you come to be so good at it? And what sort of things did you focus on when negotiating during 2008?
Happy Friday, everybody. Hope everybody is safe and healthy given everything that's going on. Thank you, V. I was pretty fortunate because as everyone knows or may know, I went to Northwestern Law School. Northwestern, amongst the law schools, is actually known for its negotiation program. So different law schools are known for different things. Harvard for constitutional law, and Northwestern really had an incredibly strong negotiation program, and I learned a ton there. And then I became a mergers and acquisitions lawyer. So when I was 25, I was thrown into negotiations, watching some of the people doing multi-billion-dollar deals at 5 a.m. that hadn't slept for a month, negotiating literally billions of dollars. So just learned a ton. So I was definitely the more well equipped to negotiate certain things. And I think at the time, what you ultimately had to really keep your eye on was, where did you need to get to in a particular result? Now it might be negotiating with a landlord or a vendor, things like that. But for us, this stuff was pretty dramatic, and so you really had to understand one of the things I'm going to share with a little bit later, just how much leverage mattered. And I don't want to get too deep into it, but I'll give you a great story. The world was collapsing, cash is going out the window. And one of our largest customers was Washington Mutual, the bank. Had a $6-7 million software license contract with them. Well, if you remember the 2008 financial crisis, they literally went bankrupt in a week, got bought by JP Morgan. And we got a call from a lawyer, and they said, we just bought Washington Mutual and you owe us $5 million. And we're like,
My God.
What? Remember, this is when we're already burning cash and the world's collapsing. And we're like, hi, what's your name? I'm Michael. Nice to meet you. And he said, well, we just bought Washington Mutual, and over the course of the years, you guys have supplied a lot of rewards, gift cards to them, and sometimes those rewards expire. And as you know, when we go into bankruptcy court, everything's out the window, and it's all about equity. And so we're going to present to the court that basically you guys have expired $5 million of gift cards over the course of 7 or 8 years, and we want you to pay us $5 million. And my whole job and my whole team's job is that I've got a team of 100 lawyers in a basement somewhere that their only job is to maximize the resource, the asset we just bought in Washington Mutual. And it's like, okay.
My God.
So the world's burning, and I get a call from a guy and says, I got 100 lawyers, and I'm going to go after you for $5 million. So I said, hi, I'm Michael. Used to be an M&A lawyer, did a little bankruptcy back in my day, so I know a little bit of what you're talking about. And I said, so here's the thing. Don't have $5 million. Wouldn't give it to you if I did. And I said, since we're all being all big boys and girls here, about 500 feet from me is a fulfillment center in which every single day we ship out millions of gift cards to people that had, completed health behaviors like you would see with a loyalty program.
Mm-hmm.
And we send that out all the time to Washington Mutual employees that have done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I said, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to walk into that fulfillment center and I'm going to tell them to stop sending gift cards to all Washington Mutual people. That's going to happen in an hour. And number two is I'm going to call the Wall Street Journal and I'm going to tell them that Washington Mutual isn't paying its employees. And I said, you know what? Let's go look at your stock price. Let's go look at your market cap. And we went online. I said, he goes, what are you talking about? I go, let's do it. So looked at the market cap, and the market cap was whatever it was, $30 billion, $50 billion. And I said, you know what? I was like, I bet you I can move your stock price 1%. And you know what that is? That's $50 million if I move it 1%. I said, so you owe me $45 million.
Unbelievable.
And he went, okay. And I said, I'm doing that in an hour because I know you're going to lie to me. You're going to tell me you're not going to do this and you're not going to do that. And I said, I want in an hour, I want to release that you guys, we don't want to hurt your employees. We want to continue to send out the gift cards they've earned, right? We don't want to hurt them, but I don't know you. I don't trust you. We didn't have a dialogue here. So in 1 hour, I'm going to walk over there and do that regardless of what you do. And I said, the only way I'm not going to do that is if you send me a release that basically releases us from anything other than our obligations, blah, blah, blah. And this is what he said to me. He goes, I can't get you a release in an hour. I'm like, you just told me you have 100 lawyers in the basement, dude. You can get a release in an hour. Let them figure it out. And 45 minutes later, I had a release in my email that said, we'll not do this and not do that. And to this day, I'm still friends with the guy. But, when you're in a crisis, you think you're a good negotiator, but a lot of times you just have to be bold because as everyone knows on the phone, like you don't have a choice. You're like, okay, fine, but I don't really care. I mean, so, and again, this relates a little bit to what I'm going to talk about in the beginning, which is leverage. So needless to say, it was an interesting 15-minute conversation.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen, negotiating 101. And let me tell you, I've worked and run the Lonely Entrepreneur alongside Michael for about 5 years now. And I'm saying that not because we do this together, but Michael has the negotiating skills like no other. I come from a corporate finance background and I've been on, merger and acquisitions deals, but the way Michael negotiates is is incredible. So thank you, Michael. Looking forward to our discussion. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Great. So listen, I really appreciate everybody's time as always. We never want to forget that because I know how hard people are working but this one right now is incredibly important and most people are not taught negotiation skills and are just kind of winging it. So I wanted to give you a couple of principles that are super important that really, really make the difference. And the best way this was described to me was when I was in law school by a negotiation professor who's one of the world's leading experts on it, and said, if you drew a pie chart and you said, and this pie chart was supposed to represent the criteria about whether you win a negotiation or not. Okay, so what are the factors that allow you to win a negotiation? And he said that the number one factor about whether you want to win a negotiation, that pie chart is 100% leverage. What leverage do you have? Okay. And if you start with the mentality of I have to have leverage, right? And remember, a lot of times we're going to talk about in a second, you don't have leverage, right? You have to create, you have to be creative, you have to, right, do different things. And I'm going to share some other stories with you. That 100% of the pie chart is what leverage do I have over the person on the other side? Okay. Now, if it turns out that the person on the other side is reasonable, right, then maybe that pie chart changes from 100% leverage to 80% leverage and 20%. Okay, there's a reasonable person. And maybe part of it is you have a relationship with the person. So, okay, it's not 100% leverage, it's part leverage and it's part relationship and it's part reasonable. And maybe you're willing to trade, but the point is, if you need to be successful in a negotiation, right, you have to start with the mentality is I need leverage. Okay, so think about my example of Washington Mutual. What leverage did I have? So Victoria, did I have any leverage? Right, I have nothing. I'm fighting,
nope, not really.
fighting a behemoth that has 100 lawyers that can crawl down. So because of my training, my brain went to, this guy's not going to be, this is not I start with leverage. Like, I don't even ask, is he reasonable? Is he nice? Is he a good dude? My brain goes, okay, what leverage do I have? Okay, I don't have leverage. Now, if it turns out he's a reasonable dude, fine, but did that sound like a reasonable dude? What I'm saying to you is start with leverage. Start with what leverage do I have? Okay, and then if you have a relationship, great. If you have reasonable people, great. If you can horse trade, great. But it's that leverage that ultimately makes the difference, right, of whether you win or not. Now, I want to make a comment that your goal is not to necessarily only to win, right? Your goal in really good negotiations is for both sides to walk away happy. So I'm not suggesting that you're trying to bludgeon people on the other side of the table. But if you can always give back. I can't tell you how many times in a negotiation where we've negotiated something, negotiated really hard, gotten to a deal, and then gone back and said to the other side, and we're going to give this thing back to you, right? Because we want to have a relationship. So the goal of a negotiation is not necessarily for you to win. It's for both sides to win. But as you guys know, right now, a lot of people were chasing the same dollars, right? And it's a zero-sum game. And if you talk to we're going to talk a little bit about Landlord and stuff in a minute.
Michael, that's a really important point, because I think for a lot of people, especially people who aren't used to negotiating, the premise of negotiating means that I have to walk away with a bigger piece of pie, or I have to do it so that, the other party is kind of screwed in some way. And that's the wrong mindset, right? That the idea should be that both parties end up in a place where they're comfortable and happy with.
100%. The only problem is I don't think my Washington Mutual guy really cared, right? So yeah, yes, in the end, listen, I could have gone to him and said, it's worth a lot more to me to not send your gift cards than it is to do the right thing and send your gift cards for the ones, for the people going forward. So I said to him, I want you to win. I don't want, you to get hurt. I want us to have a relationship. So the only problem is here's my thing. If you try to analyze the psyche of people on the other side of the table, it doesn't work. Like in going to law school, I went to school with a bunch of guys from Minnesota. And there was this kind of funny joke that said, what's the definition of forever? And they said, four Minnesotans at a four-way stop intersection, right? Everybody would stop and defer, but is one of those four people a hardcore negotiator? Would one of those four people take your firstborn to win a deal? You don't know that. And so you have to start with, people should earn the right for that pie chart to switch, just like with me. If you're negotiating with me, right, I should earn the fact that I'm reasonable and I'm willing to trade and I'm willing to help. But you don't know me from anybody. You should always start with that pie chart being leverage, right? And that's a super, super important point. Now, if people end up being reasonable and cool and helpful and all things, that's icing on the cake. But you need a result. Everybody on this call needs a result. I need my landlord not to charge me rent. I need to get out of this. I need to get out of that, right? Like, and you've got to be able to bring leverage to the table. So your job, right, is to figure out how to get that leverage. Be any questions, or I'm going to tell another story.
Go for it.
Okay. So when we were a young company selling reward programs, we were selling to big health plans, and we were selling to Cigna, and they put out a request for a proposal, as you guys know, is these big proposals they put out. We filled it out, blah, blah, and they get a call one day that every entrepreneur wants. We were probably 20 employees at the time. We had won some small health plans, but nothing like Cigna. And I get a call from the director of procurement from Cigna, and he said, I wanted to call you to congratulate you. And what do you mean? She goes, you've won our RFP and you've beaten this big company and this big company and this big company, and we want you to be our vendor. And I was like, so this, whatever, represented multi-million-dollar stuff. And he goes, there's one catch. Now, if you ever worked with procurement people, there's always a catch, right? He said, we're not going to pay you anything. I was like, what? He said, if you successfully implement your reward program at Cigna, it will literally make you $1 billion company. He goes, if you're successful at putting it in here, the number of employers that will have it, the number of individuals that would have it, the data you'll have will be off the charts. So we're not going to pay you anything. I said, okay, cool. First of all, thank you. It's an honor to be selected. And let us think about it a little bit. So my brain immediately goes to, well, that's silly. The 5 or 10 million, whatever the number was, I forget, price that we had on it is a rounding error, and Cigna loses that in their couch every day. And I went back and I said, okay, I need leverage, right? How do I get leverage?
How did you keep your cool at that moment when a company of that size says that to you?
One of the things you have to be able to do when you negotiate is be willing to walk away and be cool even when your stomach's churning. Now you have to remember, as a 26-year-old not sleeping for a week with, guys in conference rooms throwing stuff at each other over multi-billion-dollar deals, you get a pretty strong stomach. So, but as everybody knows on this call, it's different when it's somebody else's money. You might, as an M&A lawyer, you might feel pressure and stuff like that, but it's not your money. Once you make it your money and your employees and all that kind of stuff and your family, it's a different deal. Right. So I said, okay. And I said to myself, okay, how do I get leverage over Cigna? And so I started to ask around, and I started to talk to some people. And what I found out was that Cigna, like a lot of the big health plans, really lived and died based on the revenue they got from their biggest employers that they provided insurance to. So Cigna had Mass Mutual and Federal Express and Safeway and all of these big employers. And I found out if those big employers told Cigna to change their logo, Cigna would probably change their logo because they got so much revenue from these big employers. So I was like, okay, that sounds cool. So I found out there was an advisor group, Cigna Advisor Group, which represented their biggest employers. And I called up everybody in the advisor group. And I said, hi, Mr. FedEx. Hi, Mrs. Safeway. Hi, we're this company called Incent One. Do you believe that rewarding healthy behavior is going to be a solution for the future? And they said, absolutely. And I said, this is what we'd like to do. We'd like to just inform you and your people about it. I'm not here to sell you anything. I just want to tell you all about what's going on in the world and where it's going. And they were like, awesome, that's great. And then of the 25, 6 or 7 of them, after we told them about us, said, can we get proposals from you, right? But the rest of them said, and I asked them, I said, let me ask you a question. Now, they didn't know I was negotiating with Cigna. I said, let me ask you a question. Do you think that you should get this type of solution from your health plan? And almost to a T, all of them went off. They went off and said, our health plan, they charge us so much. They never provide any services. Like every one of them hated their health plan because they were providing them they were paying them so much money, $10,000 an employee, right? Times 50,000, like they were paying them so much. And I realized that even though a health plan insures an employer, they hate them. I was like, awesome. So now all of a sudden I'm tight with not tight, but I'm getting to know these 20 people. We're holding free webinars. We're giving a proposal. I can call up the head of benefits from Federal Express whenever I want, right? Who controls a $100 billion spend. So I told my salesperson who was selling Cigna, and I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I forbid you to call Cigna on the side. So when all the people call you on the side with what I'm about to do, if you talk to any of them, you're fired. Okay? So I picked up the phone and I called the director of procurement and I said, first of all, again, thank you. It's an honor to be selected. We're going to pass. He's like, what? I'm like, we're going to pass. The amount of money that we're charging for this is a rounding error. And I would think that you would want us to be successful. I don't think we're going to be successful, so we're going to pass. He goes, are you sure? I go, yeah. I said, I only have one request. And what's that? He goes, I said, it's oftentimes that we come in contact with the employers that use you for either all or part of their employees. And if that happens, we'd like to collaborate with you. And he goes, you can't talk to our employers. I was like, all due respect, I don't think FedEx would view themselves as your employer. And I said, I'm just telling you that we'd like to collaborate with you. If we're working with somebody like FedEx, we'd like to collaborate with you. And they're like, he's like, I want you in Connecticut tomorrow. I was like, hold on a sec. You just told me that you're not going to pay me anything. And I just told you that we're going to pass. Like, why do I have to drive in 2 hours to go to Connecticut and traffic for 2 hours to go to Connecticut? He goes, get up here. And I got up there and there were 20 people in the room, lawyers, accounting people, finance people, business people. And I said, listen, I don't understand this. You're Cigna, you can do whatever you want to me. Like, I'm not arguing with you. I just want to know that if we are working with Federal Express and they want us to work with you, do you want to do that? And I walked out of that room with a deal that was about 40% higher than the original price that we provided to them. So the only reason I did that is because I figured out a way to get leverage. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. It's an amazing story, and we're getting some great feedback that, you know, it's you can't make this stuff up. It just goes to show the kind of the entrepreneurial creativity. And sometimes, you know, the path isn't always clear, but once you start getting into it and you understand that even if you're really small and you think you have no leverage, there is always a way.
Yeah, you have to, in fact, I would say, V, to expand on that, what I would say is that you have to create and find the leverage. You have to say what makes that person do something. And my examples of Washington Mutual and Cigna are completely different examples, right? It has to be, you have to, like, you as an entrepreneur have to bring your creativity to the table, right? To extract or create that leverage. This is probably the most important skill that you can have when it comes to negotiation, because you call up your landlord and you say to your landlord, hey landlord, the world's collapsing and it's the end of the world and I think you should give me a break. And the landlord goes, why give you a break? You have a lease, you have a personal guarantee, I'm not giving you a break. Right? So you're like, okay, right? So if you don't have that and create that leverage, and do you know the famous story, the famous Applebee's story, right? The only reason I'm telling you these stories is not our history. It's more about how you have to think creatively to have an impact on the person on the other side of the table.
Right.
Okay.
But these stories, right? The stories this is reality. This is what happened. This is what you actually did, right? And that's an actual result.
They're really great, funny stories right now. They were literally like having an enema, because you're not sitting there going, oh, I'm just going to drive to Connecticut and these 30 really smart people are just going to go, okay, in San Juan, we'll pay you $5 million. In fact, I'm pretty sure, I mean, this might be a little bit arrogant, but I'm pretty sure I could have charged them whatever I wanted to charge them at that point. Because they had, amongst those 25, we figured it out, amongst those 25 employers on their advisory group, it represented something like, I'm going to get the number wrong, something like $36 billion of revenue.
Oh my God.
Or some ridiculous number. So what is $5 million?
Nothing.
Nothing. If I got one of those employers to leave Cigna because of that. So.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Public enemy number one.
Right. So you go from, I'm negotiating with no cards, which, oh, by the way, how many of us as entrepreneurs are negotiating with cards? How many times are we selling to bigger companies that you really, 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 really need their business, right? And they come back and say, you know, too much, right? And you're sitting and you don't have any leverage.
Totally. So we
So
have a couple of questions actually.
sure.
So what if you already disclosed you don't have leverage? There's a relationship and I'm cultivating more, but the initial conversation got really aggressive despite what I felt was a close-ish relationship.
So I think the challenge is you have to start with leverage, right? If you go down the path and you kind of show your cards and you show where you are and you're expecting the person on the other side of the table to kind of be reasonable, that you're kind of violating the pie chart, right? And once you violate the pie chart and you've kind of opened up the kimono, right, it's really difficult to backtrack. I know, for example, like I know the things we were going to talk about a little today was like landlords. This is happening a lot with landlords. I would suggest to you that, what's your leverage over a landlord, right? Like what leverage do you have? Probably the biggest pieces of leverage that you have, number one is cash, right? You may have to give them cash in exchange for things. But the other thing is, like certainly in New York City, for example, the retail market has been decimated in New York City prior to COVID. And so the risk of a landlord losing a tenant, right? Being like, listen, do to me whatever you want, but I'm going to leave tomorrow. And most of the leases in New York City, this may not be true in other places, they have these things called good guy clauses where once you leave the space, they can't go after you personally if you've signed a personal guarantee. So if you're negotiating, you basically say, hey, do to me whatever you want. I'm going to leave in a month. You're going to take my security deposit for a month anyway. I'm gone. I would change it. I would change the dialogue. And I would go, but let's say somebody's paying $15,000 a month in rent, and somebody has a 3 months of security deposit. They have $45,000, right? I would go to them and I would say, so here's the thing. The world's terrible. The world's collapsing. COVID, obviously the demonstrations, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to make it. I'm going to have to leave. And it's just the reality. And if they said, wait a minute, how do we help? How do we keep you here? Because remember, the leverage is the fact that they can't get another tenant, right? It's going to be really, really hard. They're going to have to give away 6 months free. Like it just doesn't work, right? And that's the leverage you have, Now, you could go and say, hey, I'm doing okay. And I got some PPP money and I'm doing this and this and this and this. And a lot of landlords, some like everybody knows my family has some real estate. Like we're trying to be helpful and trying to get them there. But a lot of them are just like, I don't care. I'll take whatever money you have, right? I would go to them and say, okay, here's the thing. I want free rent for a year and I want my security deposit. And if you say no, I'm out. Now, they're not going to agree to that, okay? But would they agree to this month and the next month and the next month, right? Would they agree to something where you'd say, listen, we got to be in this together, and I'll give you a percentage of my sales if I come back? But the point is, unless you start with leverage, you don't get to have that conversation. Now, let's say that you said that and you've got a relationship and you want to build it and they want to help you, then backtrack and work together and figure out a way that everybody wins. But in all of these circumstances, unfortunately, you got to try to figure out a way to get leverage.
Right. And another question, how do you get leverage over an investor?
Super, super complicated. I would say that ultimately, how much you control the company makes a huge deal. If you do have control over the company, meaning more than half the stock, if you control the board, if you control certain decision-making, which a lot of times the founder does, you can go to your investor and say, I have to agree to everything. So you can do whatever you want, but a year or two down the line, we're not going to agree to the things that you want to agree to. I know in the Incent One days, when everything happened in 2008, we needed additional cash, as everyone knows now. And we went to our investor that was a very large venture private equity fund, and we said, we want X million dollars. And we will tie it to results. We'll tie it to valuation. Let's go have that discussion. But, you know, the reason why you have institutional investors is so you can deal with times like this. And they said, no. And I said, wait a minute, no at all? No valuation, no, not tied to results. No, what's the, like, and they just said no. And I said, I want you to understand something. And we still controlled, I forget, 83, 84% of the company. And we said, I want you to understand something. When we come back from this and we bounce back and we're looking to sell the company or do our next thing or, you know, put more money into the company, but probably more likely sell it. I said, the economic deal we have right now, which is you get this and we get this, I'm not doing that. And they're like, what are you talking about? That's the deal. I'm like, yep, that's the deal. You're supposed to get this and I'm supposed to get that. I said, I need you now. You're saying no. Got it. The economic deal that we've struck in 2 years, right, when we're back and we've fought through this without your help, I'm not going to approve any deal. Because at that point, we're going to make it back, whatever. So you're in this investment forever, right? And I control the decision making. I control what deals we're going to make. So knock yourself out. Don't help me now. But I just want you to know that piece of paper that says you get this and I get that, that's the piece of paper, but I still have to approve the deal, so I'm not going to do it. So, you know, it's much more complicated with existing investors. Do you know, was the question about existing investors or new investors?
New.
With respect to new investors, it's no different. The leverage comes over the fact they have to feel like there's a burning platform that they must have your service or somebody else is going to get it. I mean, you have to. That's why I'm going to talk a little bit about negotiating with customers as well, which we talked a lot about a couple weeks ago about revenue, about how you negotiate there. So, and I'll get into it in a minute. But people say right now, are people shut down from investing? There's no question that they're baking in what's happening with the economy to valuations and stuff like that. But there are people that believe that there are valuable solutions out there. You just have to be able to be compelling enough for them to go, man, I better not miss this. Okay, and that's obviously challenging to do with some of the economic things that are going on.
Yeah, so I think this just goes to, right, kind of negotiating from a position of strength, just talking about leverage, even when we don't necessarily feel like we have all the cards.
Yeah, which we never do. That's why it's a skill, right? That's why it's a skill and a capability to be able to do it. I mean, think about when we're negotiating with, and these are these principles, right? Think about when you're negotiating with a customer right now, right? You go to a customer and you're selling them, I don't know, PR services or, you know, whatever. And you say, hi, you know, I think we're going to do a great job and, you know, we can really help you and blah, blah, blah. And right now with COVID, aren't there oodles and oodles and more PR companies, right? Aren't there PR companies that are, you know, willing to do almost anything for any amount of money, and individual PR consultants? And I mean, right?
Right.
Almost the perspective, right? And we shared this a couple of weeks ago, almost the perspective of everybody believes that they can get the services, especially like B2B services, for free. There are so many people out there that are really, really talented and ready, willing, and able to help. But people say, if we're the buyers of this, you should be able to get this for almost nothing, right? There's a little bit of get what you pay for, but there's a lot of really, really talented people right now that are willing to, you know, obviously it's dramatically impacted that stuff. So you're sitting there and you're going, well, wait a minute, I'm a PR firm and I'm trying to sell my services to a company, and that company believes that there's a million of me. So how do I win? And again, it comes down to ultimately to what leverage to create. And in the case of revenue like this, you have got to be able to show them how a piece of knowledge or know-how you have makes them really win or potentially really lose, right? So if you know something about your product or service and you have a knowledge about your product or service, you have to make them feel like, man, if this person walks out the door and I use somebody else and I don't know this, I'm in real trouble. So I'll give you an example. we work with this great little company called Whisker Docs, and Whisker Doc does pet telemedicine. I encourage you all to take a look at it. So all the things you wouldn't go to your vet for, which you can't even go to your vet now, but everything except the most significant clinical things that you do, you go to Whisker Docs, you pay a subscription, and you can solve your problem online. You can chat or email back and forth with their what they call vet techs, or you can opt in and actually talk to a veterinarian. It's a great service. So there's a lot of, and they sell their services to consumers, but they also sell their consumers to businesses like health insurance, pet insurance companies, and other insurance companies. And so a lot of times when they're selling against their competitors to, for example, a pet insurance company, the competitors will say, the health insurance company will say, yeah, you got a call center and you've got an online platform and you've got some vets. Okay, fine. But anybody, like there's 10 companies that do that. And that's fair, right? When you really think about the service, it's a call center and it's technology, and there's a bunch of different people that do this. And so if we go in and we say, this is all the stuff we do, and everybody else says this is all the stuff they do, and somebody charges less than us, which remember, we always should assume that people do, we're in trouble. So we say things like this. If you've lived in New York City at all, you know that outside of most of the big doorman buildings and big apartment complexes in New York, there's like one tree that's planted. And that one tree has a little barbed wire thing around it, and there's a little bit of foliage, around the tree. Do you know that those trees, right, that little foliage is laced with all kinds of different toxins and pesticides to keep away animals from eating it, right? And that if your dog went in there and a unbeknownst dog owner went and just walking down the street and their dog ate the foliage, right, the dog could die. So, hey, Mr. Customer, who is Progressive Insurance with a huge brand name, if you want to go get the cheapest solution, you should. And I'm just telling you, when something tragic happens, don't call us. Okay? Because I just told you one, there's 30 of these that you need to know, that if you don't know these things, you've got 30 million customers that buy insurance from you. Let me know what happens. Okay? So even in negotiating with customers, you have to be able to show, it's a different type of leverage, but you have to be able to show this whole idea that I have a know-how that you don't have and that you need to either get pleasure or pain, right? You either will win things or you'll lose things, right? And those things can be dramatic, like something tragic, like the loss of a pet. Any questions? Sorry, just want to stop for a second.
Yeah, no, this is great. Just again, right, that specific know-how and what kind of differentiates you. So
cool. Okay. And obviously there's many anecdotes from this, but I think that creating leverage and creating a know-how that they can't live without. And remember, you can't just, when you're negotiating with customers these days, you can't just say, I have this service and I'm good at it. I mean, think of it this way, use my PR firm example. If you were dropped here from another planet and you started a PR firm, what would your website say? It would say, great service, lots of press coverage, right? Best pricing. I mean, that's what everybody says, right? You got to come to the table and say, this is a piece of know-how that I know that you need to know, that if you go and hire the next firm and the next firm and the next firm, right? They're not going to know that. And so what you want them to do is you want them to go to the next firm and say, so what do you know about this? And most likely, not a guarantee, but most likely they're not going to know. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about vendors. When it comes to vendors, every single vendor is facing the reality that their revenue is going to go down, and keeping existing customers is incredibly important. We're in this for a good long haul. And so, if you're everybody from somebody that mows your lawn to, a PR consultant to a technology provider, every single company out there is going back to its vendors and reworking their deals, right? And the last thing that a vendor wants or can deal with right now is oodles and oodles of customers leaving, right? They will do a heck of a lot to keep you. Not every single one, right? But this is where your threat of leaving, becomes your leverage. You're basically, listen, like, you can charge me whatever you want to charge me, but I'm just telling you that I'm getting this cheaper from somewhere else. And really putting the ball in their court to come back to you and say, you've got to keep and earn my business. Now, you can probably tell from the tone of my discussion around here is that one of these, we talked about some of these principles of negotiation. One is obviously leverage and one is this know-how. But the other is you should never be negotiating from a position of weakness. You should always negotiate from a position of strength. I don't care if you're sitting down with an investor and you can't afford the Uber ride over to the meeting. You should still go in there and say, this is what we think is going to happen. And if you get it, or if you believe in that, you'll have success. So I don't mean to make it sound like this stuff is easy, but the investor that invested in my company was a very, very rigorous financial investor. And we were negotiating valuation. We were a $2 million company at that point, and we were negotiating a big valuation. And they were coming back and pushing really hard, normal negotiation on valuation. And I said the following. I said, do you believe that rewarding people for being healthy is going to be an important part of reducing healthcare costs in the country and the world in the next couple of years? And they said, sure. I said, okay. We spend $2 trillion a year in the United States on healthcare. If we move the needle 1%, okay, that's $20 billion, 1%, okay? I'm not gonna negotiate $10 million of valuation with you. If you don't buy it, no harm, no foul, we'll all go home. But if you really think that $10 million here and there is where we should be discussing, we're not having that discussion anymore. But it was only because you created this, I don't want to say leverage, but you created a different dialogue, right? About if I want to get $50,000 from somebody, I should communicate to them that if they don't give me $50,000, it's going to cost them $1 million, right? Like I did with the Washington Mutual guy, right?
Yeah.
So I told him he owed me 45 million, right? So the point is that, again, when you get good, reasonable people across the table, or everyone's trying to help each other, none of this matters. You can just talk and say, give me this and you give me that, and I'll change your rent for this month and we'll do it forward. A lot of times, but a lot of times you don't have the ability to do that, and you don't have all the time that you need to be able to do that. So when you think about these concepts of having and creating leverage and using your entrepreneurial skills to do that, showing your knowledge and know-how, right, to customers so they can't live without you, right? And always negotiating from a position of strength. So, and that strength comes from the fact that, like, listen, how hard is it to say, I can't pay my bills, right? I'm going to negotiate with you from a position of strength. But that goes to the capability, the technique to say, how do I get leverage, right? How do I get leverage? Is, listen, I'm sorry to tell you this, but if we don't strike a deal, I have to leave. There's no way I can stay here, right? And I don't have my security deposit anyway. I'm not getting that back anyway. That's not money that I have, right? And so I'm going to leave tomorrow. So what does the landlord say? The landlord goes back and, well, man, if they leave, it's going to take me 6 months to get somebody in here, and I'm going to have to give them 6 months free, and then and the rent that they pay in 6 months is going to be less, right? So you can see how a landlord would go, huh, like, what are my choices here, right? And I think the same thing is true with vendors, right? Go back to your vendors, go back to your marketing services companies, go back to your your technology vendors and say, the world's changing. I need you to change with me. I'm not going to debate it with you. If you don't see the merit in reducing your costs from here to there, we'll just have to part ways. I also would say going forward, this is where, we kind of use this hokey marketing phrase, survive and thrive, but setting yourself up to thrive is also renegotiating with your vendors in such a way that your cost structure is more appropriate and lower given the upcoming economic environment that we're going to be in, right? So the goal here to our earlier conversation is not to bludgeon people, right? It's to create collaborative relationships, but the way you get to those collaborative relationships is you have to start with leverage, and you have to start with this idea that you can't negotiate from a position of weakness.
Great points. And ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that I want to reinforce is, we're always talking here at the Lonely Entrepreneur about the, specific skills that we entrepreneurs need to learn, but also coupled with a specific mindset, right? So those two things are always at the top of our minds as we talk to you about different issues and how these things really come to life, and what, what we as entrepreneurs have to do both within the mindset and the specific skills that we have to learn across the business.
V, a lot of the comments that we're making here is about making it compelling, right? What makes it compelling to the other person to move? And unfortunately, right, nice to have doesn't work these days, right?
No.
So for example, when we think about, how do you get customers to move? If you're a videographer, for any of you that have done, video, it's incredibly amount of talent, hard work, dedication, undervalued in the world today because, it's such amount of editing that goes into that. And at the same time, people pay virtually nothing for it. Videographer needs to be able to say, just whatever you do, don't do these three things, right? And they have to be able to convince people that those three things matter. And man, if I don't hire this person, right, you can go pay nothing for it, but I'm just telling you, if you do these three things, you're going to go spend all this time and money. And you need me for those three things. We need me so your dog doesn't eat the foliage, right? And that's Vic, exactly to your point. Entrepreneurism is a series of skills, many of them, right? And the ability to bring your creativity to creating leverage and your mindset to be able to negotiate when you have no cards, right? Which is all the time.
Mm-hmm.
These are the things that actually drive result. If any one of you, many of you reach out to us after these calls and ask us for help for certain things, and it's been our pleasure to do that. And, if any one of you called up tomorrow and said, I have a proposal in, but I think I'm competing against 20 other companies for my proposal, we would try to figure out how to get leverage. One of our closest companies that's near and dear to us, I won't mention who they are because I'll protect the names. Imagine if you wanted a big supermarket chain to do what you wanted, right? And that big supermarket chain wasn't stocking your products properly, right? And you went to the big supermarket chain and you said to the big supermarket chain, hey, Mrs. Supermarket Chain, you're not stocking my products properly. I'd really like your help. And they don't do it, and they don't do it, because they're a big supermarket chain. Well, what leverage do I have? I'm one product of a million. I do some good sales there, but it's not like it's the end all be all. There's lots and lots of products there. So how do you get leverage over a big supermarket chain? Well, you go and you have a couple of customers say, hey, I showed up at the supermarket chain, in Washington, D.C., and they didn't have this product, right? Or, I happen to, this particular company does a lot of work with veterans, and this veteran organization did this big promotion, and we all went in to buy this product, and it wasn't on the shelves. All of a sudden, the supermarket chain goes, wait a minute, I'm disappointing my customers. And everybody's, granted, in COVID, supermarket chains are always gonna have customers, but in a normal world, the big players out there are all fighting for your attention. They're all saying, wait a minute, how do I survive? So none of this is meant to be, sometimes this is taken as mean or arrogant, or it's not meant to be any of those things. It's the fact that shouldn't a supermarket chain for its vendors, shouldn't it stock the product properly? I mean, shouldn't they do that? But they don't. And when they don't do it, you can call up and say, hi, please, can you please do that? But if they don't, what is your recourse? Your customer, you go through all the work to spend money on digital marketing, and you get them in the store and they're excited to buy your product and it's not there. How do you have to change that? So I know right now, some of the examples I'm giving are about growth in the future. But remember, the examples I gave in the beginning were very much around a crisis, and in preserving cash, right, and surviving. And so your ability to bring these skills to the table with landlords and vendors and certainly customers are critical to getting the results that you have to drive when you're leading your company through a crisis.
Awesome.
I know, Victoria, I've gotten a couple of questions that have come directly to me that I'll just throw out there. Thank you, everybody, for participation. You know, one of the questions was the lasting impact on relationships of doing these types of things. Here's what I would say. When you have somebody on the other side of the table from you, it's not unreasonable for a landlord to say, listen, we have a lease and you need to pay your lease and we need to do, I mean, it's not a matter of, it's not a moral judgment, right? These are legal contracts and we're supposed to stick to them. But you have to get a result as the leader of your company. I remember it explicitly saying to all the people in my company, I was like, the rules aren't going to work for us because the world doesn't care about a company. Even though a couple 100-person company is a pretty big company, it's like Bear Stearns was collapsing, right? AIG was collapsing. Nobody cared. And I said, you've heard me say this many times, right? Don't kill anybody. Don't break any laws. But, right, 2 + 2 is now 5.
Do what you got to
right?
do.
Do what you have to do. And in those discussions, you know, you had to create, you know, leverage, and try to negotiate from a position of strength. Because if the person on the other side of the table, if Washington Mutual had called me up and said, listen, we're looking into this issue and we want to work through this with you and see how we can do this. I understand it's a terrible time. We want to work together. I probably still would have started with my pie chart at 100% because they're Washington Mutual, right? They're nothing wrong with Washington Mutual. They're just a big company that has, you know, lawyers with backgrounds that like mine that don't necessarily always care about the entrepreneur. But I would have had a different discussion down the line. But remember, you have to get a result. Like you can't, you know, it's funny, you know, if you ever worked with lawyers, of which I am one, if you've ever worked with PR professionals, they will say things like, and again, I don't know if I'm mean to be picking on PR professionals. I have a lot of respect for them, but or lawyers, but they will say things like this to you. A lawyer will say, well, I don't control the judges. And PR people will say, I don't control the editors. They're like, hold on a sec. So I'm paying you X per hour, or I'm paying you X a month, or whatever it is. And you're telling me that you don't control the result you're supposed to get from me. So many of the people on the call today, many former entrepreneurs have had sales backgrounds, right? And does a salesperson control a buyer? Of course not. The salesperson has to influence a buyer, has to create leverage over the buyer, has to create the belief that if they walk out the door, that know-how is going to go out. I mean, how ridiculous is it to say you don't control them? Your job's to control. The point is, how do you control them, right? With a judge, you say if a judge comes down with a decision that might get appealed, that's really bad for a judge. I mean, you have to go into all of these situations with this skill of how do I do it? So if reasonable people are on the other side of the table and you're a reasonable person, there's always meeting of the minds. You can always give back. You can always say, I want to give you this and I want to give you that. But if you don't start from a position of strength and negotiate with leverage and all that stuff, there's a lot of times where you'll end up in a position where you won't be able to go back. And if somebody says to you, like, for example, we have a real estate client in New York, a real estate tenant in New York in one of our properties. And they just put, and again, we're trying to be collaborative with them, help them, have them make it. But at the same time, you know, there's real estate that has to be paid for. We know for a fact that not for a fact, we know because we're involved in it, that they just spent $1 million renovating their space, right? There's no way that they're leaving tomorrow when they just have $1 million of sunk cost in their space, right? So we have leverage. Now, we're trying to do the right thing and we're trying to partner with them because we want them to stay and be successful. But if they called up tomorrow and said, we're leaving, we're out the door, we'd be like, got it, because we know they're not. So, and again, none of this is about being disingenuous or lying, but if the person on the other side of the table in great negotiations wants everybody to win, awesome, that's great. But you can't start there, right? I can't tell you how many times there have been people that have gone to relationships they've been with for many, many, many years and said, listen, many years, or they said, listen, I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna do the right thing. I'm gonna help you out for a while. And when push comes to shove, that's not only the case. And so I would suggest to you the relationships that can be built, if you get what you want, give something back. If you get what you want, when you get 2 or 3 months down the road, give them something they didn't ask you for. And those can form bonds for years and years and years. But right now, your job is to preserve cash, reduce expenses, grow revenue or preserve revenue, all the things we talk about being in the plan, that really you're ultimately responsible for, to make sure your organization is set up to survive and ultimately thrive.
That's great. Michael, thank you for such valuable insights and advice. And like I said, your stories always, I think, make a difference and kind of drive the point home, because it's one thing to talk theory, it's another thing to, share real life examples and how your entrepreneurial experience really made the difference. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I just hope that, some of the experiences that we had and some of the challenges that we went through can be in some way allow people to walk away, and have a better chance of, surviving through this whole thing and being setting up for the future. So again, everybody, the Entrepreneur Survival Guide is free. Just go to lonelyentrepreneur.com. You'll see this big survival guide on top. Click on it. It's free, and feel free to pass it along to your friends. And if there's anything we can do to help, all the
and I just want to remind
everybody
that, our learning community, our online learning community is also available for you 24/7 to jump on and ask questions and interact, in a similar way. So like I said, we'll be sending out links to these recorded sessions and along for you to join the community. So looking forward to seeing everybody there.
Thank you, everybody.
Everyone. I hope you have a great Friday.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you.